There were a lot of questions that I asked myself this second time with sobriety that I had to be comfortable answering and understanding about myself to be comfortable with not drinking anymore. And so it was really about being honest with myself in those answers and
Hmm.
being honest about what I might potentially lose and if it was worth it. And the answer is yes.
Hey y'all, hey y'all, hey y'all, what's going on? Welcome back to the Stacking Days podcast, where we highlight underrepresented journeys of sobriety from within Black and Brown communities. I'm really excited today for our guest. I've been following her for some time now, and I feel like she just has a very nice, light spirit when it comes to her what she shares and how she speaks to her sobriety and recovery journey. So I'm going to bring her right up. Jasmine, welcome to the Stacking Days podcast.
Thanks for having me, Ray.
You're absolutely welcome. Looking forward to getting into this conversation with you. And I guess in order for us to cover as much ground as possible, let's just go back to the beginning of your relationship with the substance of alcohol, and we can kind of just move on from there. Is that cool?
Yeah, that's great. We caught up a little bit before we started recording, and listening to your story really had me thinking about when I first had my first drink. And I think it was around 12 or 13. A
Okay.
family member gave me a little sip of beer. But I didn't really drink heavily until I got to college. I would have maybe a wine cooler here or there during my high school years, but it was literally, I think I was on campus for less than 24 hours when I first got blackout drunk. And I don't know if it was because I came from a very military family, very regimented, strict household. It was like you can do things, but you're going to have a curfew. You're not going to do what you want when you want for as long as you want. So I think that freedom of college, it was just like, I'm just going to go all in. And I think it was literally my first day on campus. Parents had just dropped me off. It was like, I'm going to the club with my friends, and I blacked out. I got the drunkest I had ever been in my life. And I think that was the start of my journey with alcohol, because from there it was the same story every time. I was
Mm.
a bottomless pit when it came to drinking. I could drink 20 shots in a night. I would have shots lined up going shot for shot with guys. I would drink many of people under the table, and probably comes from a history of alcoholism in my family.
Mm.
Um, but that was my relationship from the beginning, and for me, I just thought it was fun. I was letting loose, I was just being free, and like that was what I thought it was supposed to be, so I drank like that for a very, 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 very long time.
I appreciate that. Can I ask you a question? Knowing that you had a history of alcoholism in your family, did that make you feel any sort of way when you started drinking in college, or were you always just kind of like keeping your eyes open for problem signs, or it wasn't even something you were thinking about? Because me too. Like when I got to college, and and all all of the eyes were further away from me. It was almost like it was almost a license to just do whatever you wanted to do. And I wasn't necessarily at the time even thinking about those like health repercussions, the kind of genetic repercussions of like my family history. I'm curious, was a little kind of birdie in your mind saying like, hey, be careful here because this is detrimental, we've seen it in your family? Were you even not even thinking about that, you're just having to have a good time?
I wasn't even thinking about that at the time. I do remember one time I was talking to my mom about a night that I had, and I remember her saying, if there was a gene for alcoholism, she was like, you have it. And
Mm.
that had always stuck with me, but it wasn't necessarily anything that I was really thinking about. I think, especially in the Black community, we don't really talk about alcoholism. If
Hmm.
anything, it's like, you can't hold your liquor, or you hold your liquor really well, but we don't really talk about it as a problem or an issue. And
Yep.
so it wasn't necessarily something that was top of mind for me at all.
Was your mother, if you don't mind sharing, did she have her own relationship and struggles with alcohol, or did this kind of predate her and your family?
Yeah, I mean, I would say my mom, I would say she doesn't necessarily have any issues with alcohol because it was more her father who actually ended up passing away from liver disease. And
Mm.
so I think she had seen it in previous generations. But I will say, me and my mom, love her. Hopefully, she doesn't listen to this, but we would literally drink together.
Yeah.
Like, that was one of the things that we would bond over. It was just like getting drunk, having crazy stories, and like going out. And so, um, it wasn't necessarily anything that was growing up, nothing that I was really thinking about.
She had enough wherewithal where she said to you, "Hey, just be careful because this thing runs in our family."
Definitely. Yep.
Yeah. Got you. So you're in college, you're having a great time on the surface, and you're drinking quite a bit. Uh, what is the road look like for you over the next couple of years as you're kind of really getting yourself deeper entrenched into kind of this scene, so to speak, at in school.
Yeah. I think I definitely had a reputation for myself of being the party girl or the fun friend, the friend that was going to bring you all of the stories of, getting thrown out of the club or doing some random crazy thing. But I think what really started to plant the seed, I think, for my sobriety was that getting blackout, there's so much that you don't remember. And relying
Hmm.
on other people to tell you what happened, it wasn't necessarily a great feeling. So, I'm laughing and joking in the moment when we're recapping the night before, but in the back of my mind, I always felt really uncomfortable with the fact that I woke up in this random place and don't know how I got there, or I'm relying on someone to tell me what happened to me and I don't necessarily remember for myself. That was always a little bit scary.
Yeah.
So I think and knowing that I couldn't just have one drink or a couple drinks, like knowing that once I started, I wasn't going to stop, I kind of knew that it was always going to be that way.
Yeah. When you were, kind of this habitual blackout drinker, and you mentioned earlier, and I totally agree with you, drinking and having an issue with alcohol or any substance for that matter is not something we actively talk about in the Black community. Where did you turn to when you started questioning this relationship for yourself, or did you just kind of try to say like, hey, so long as I can manage it, I'm on the right path? Because I'm assuming, even though it was prevalent in your family, there wasn't anybody immediately right there that you could talk to about it.
Yeah. I love that question. And I think I really give all of the credit to my sobriety to a therapist that I had at the time when I
Okay.
decided to stop drinking, because I didn't really have anyone around me that when I would talk to someone and say, I don't like the way that I drink, or man, these hangovers are really killing me, they weren't necessarily saying, maybe you have a problem, like maybe you shouldn't drink. It was more so, you just drank a little bit too much that one time, or maybe next time just don't drink as much. And in the back of my head, I'm like, you don't think I've tried that? Like, you don't
Hmm.
think that that's something that if I could do, I would? And so I never really felt like I had anyone really understand where I was coming from when I would express any discomfort with the way that I was drinking. So I really credit it to a therapist that I had at a time when I was just explaining to her my patterns and how I was drinking. And that's when she was like, well, have you ever thought about going to AA or anything like that? And it was never anything that I thought about. But it
Hmm.
was during the pandemic when you could join AA meetings virtually. You didn't have to have your camera on. People wouldn't know exactly who you were. And I gave that a shot and it really changed my life.
I love that. So I too, I don't think I even mentioned this, but therapy was a large part of kind of my exposure into this new world of healing myself. And a lot of folks talk about the work that goes into trying to establish some sort of like longer term sobriety, and then ultimately how are you recovering slash healing. um, I'm curious, in your journey of therapy, were you able to kind of uncover some of the whys behind what you're drinking, and then ultimately what was kind of your motivation in moving into a space where you wanted to pursue your sobriety?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would say it was definitely a coping mechanism as far as wanting to forget, but also giving me an excuse. I feel like
Hmm.
alcohol is a good way of giving you an excuse for the dumb things that you do or the things
Yeah.
that you don't do, right? If you haven't made any progress on your goals, but you're like, I was partying and having so much fun, but you're hungover and know that you're wasting your days away, it kind of gives you an excuse. And I think that I was using that a lot to deal with or not deal with things in my life where it's like, I know I have this potential. I know I have these dreams, but when you're drinking, that clarity, that mental clarity, that focus, that drive, it's not necessarily there. You might get inspired for a second after a couple of drinks, but are you actually going to act on those ideas?
Yeah.
Probably not. And so I think I was really using it to just run a little bit. Um, but I think what really motivated me and pushed me to sobriety, number one, is definitely having my son. I think that once he was born, babies, infants, they don't care if you were drinking the night before. They're going to be up a few times a night. They're going to be up at the crack of dawn. And being hungover, trying to parent, was probably the worst feeling that I've ever felt in my life. I think it's different when you don't have someone to take care of and you can lay in bed all day and recover. But
Yeah.
when you have, this little human looking for you to play with them, feed them, do all the things for them, doing that while you're hungover, do not recommend it to anyone. And so I think for me, it was like knowing that I can't not have at least 5 or 6 drinks and knowing that it's going to impact my body. Like I was drinking into these debilitating hangovers every single time. It
Yeah.
was like something has to give.
So then, did you in having your son coincide with your therapy, and then ultimately you moved into kind of these virtual AA meetings? What did that look like? What did that storm look like coming together for you? Because it sounds
Yeah.
like you had already been going to therapy, right? Is that correct? You had already been
On and
going to
off, I
therapy.
did. Yes, on and off, I did. But I love how you just described it as a storm because
Mm,
that was exactly what was happening. I was a new mom. So
yeah,
postpartum one is very real, but also just the stress of having a new human. I was dealing with a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. At the same time, I started a new role and a new job
yeah,
at the same time that I had my son. So I'm at this new company, highly competitive, requiring a lot from me. So, new kid, new job, drinking to cope. So, every night I'm like, all right, work day done. Son is home from daycare. Let's drink to relax, right?
yeah.
Waking up with hangovers and then trying to do that again and again. So, physically feeling unwell and just repeating the cycle. Finally, at work, it was to the point where I was really checked out, crying in meetings and just
Mm,
like not being myself, where I was like, you know what? I need a mental health break. I need to take time off from work because something is not working here. And that, because I was taking that mental health leave, it meant that I needed to go to therapy. And
gotcha.
so I went into therapy and I was like, hey, I'm on this mental health break. This is what's going on. I can't wait to finish my workday, I go and pick up my son, make sure he's home safely, and then immediately I'm having a drink and I'm repeating that cycle. And that's when my therapist said, have you ever thought about going to AA? And I was like, no, I have not. And then I went to my first AA meeting while I was on that mental health break from work.
Mm,
And I mean, I remember crying after my first AA meeting because you're listening to all of these stories and what people are going through, how much they're battling. And I'm like, thank God that I'm experiencing this at this point before it could have gotten any worse or any
yeah.
more severe, you know? And that
Mhm.
was when I was like, all right, I'm doing this. I'm not drinking anymore.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much in there because it's like, and I'll just kind of move back across what you had just mentioned. One, there's such a spectrum when it comes to how much alcohol specifically has been able to dismantle someone's life. And to your point, like you know that your stuff is not where you want it to be. But then when you start listening to other people's shares and realize how slippery the slope can actually be and where you potentially could end up. I mean, and in some cases we know folks end up passing, like your family member, by way of, the liver just basically shutting down on you. So I mean, I one want to give you your flowers for identifying that you needed to address your mental health, especially in a new job. I could imagine, and especially as someone of color in a new job, and saying like, "Hey, yo, I need to just go and check in with myself here, just intentionally, because something is just not right for me." Hopefully, you're in a position where your employer understood where you were coming from, but I mean, I'm glad that you gave yourself the space to be able to do that, because who knows where you may have ended up if you had not have taken that time, right, to be curious about how you were showing up for yourself. So one, wanted to shut you out on that, and then two, you know, I feel like in communities of color, therapy is, this boogeyman of a concept, right? And I don't know why it is. And maybe I'd like to get like your 2 cents on that. But in my experience, and I talk about this often, like I ended up finding a black woman as my therapist, and that to me was something that I needed. I had talked to a couple therapists, white women here or there, and and also a couple white men, and it just didn't really work for me. But ultimately, in order for me to get to a place where I could start having honest conversations with myself, those honest conversations started happening in therapy. And I don't know if I would have been able to have them had I had not carved out that space, where that was the expectation, that I was going to be able to try to find somewhere where I could just say things that I would probably not say otherwise. But I'm curious so I wanted to shout you on the one hand, and then also on the other hand, I'm curious what your experience was in stepping into that therapeutic space, and why don't more folks of color do it?
Totally. Well, first, shout out to the Black women therapist because it was also a Black woman therapist that recommended AA for me.
Absolutely.
And again, like I said, that was life changing. And I give all of the credit to starting my sobriety to that therapist. Um, in high school, I was actually bullied. It was like my senior year of high school. I went to my parents and I was like, I need to see someone. I need to talk to someone because I was feeling really down, almost suicidal. And I
Mm,
remember my parents, they coordinated therapy for me, but I remember my dad saying, "Don't tell anybody about this." And
really?
so, yeah, and that was my first time of like, don't tell anyone I'm going to therapy. Like, what does that mean? Like, why is that bad? And I think that, you know, Black people, we deal with so much and so much trauma. And I think showing any sign of weakness in any that can be perceived as weakness, not that going to therapy makes you weak, but showing that it can perceived as being weak is something that we generally don't want to do. I think therapy can have this stigma, right? If you go to therapy, you're crazy or something like that, and we know that that's not true, but I think that that's something that's just maybe been carried on in the Black community, and so we don't necessarily talk about it. And so I really had to break through that for a really long time. I think I did like one session with that therapist in high school and like ended up not going back. And I wouldn't go back into therapy until I saw a postpartum therapist. So
Mm,
decades later, I finally went back into therapy. And I think now, when you know better, you do better. When
yeah.
I'm talking to my friends, we're all like, "Hey, girl, are you in therapy? Where'd you find your therapist? Like, let's get this going." But I do think it is unfortunate that that stigma exists. But I do think it's changing with later
Yeah.
generations, and I think we're being more open about it.
Yeah. I think we have to be, because I mean, if you kind of just look at the spectrum of folks who are out there in the world, folks who have been marginalized, folks who have been abused, folks who've been traumatized. I mean, we need healing more. I mean, everybody needs some healing, I always say, but like we need healing almost more than the next one. And, for me, uh, you know, having some space to be able to go to where you can start understanding yourself a little bit better and how you interact with the world around you, I just think that that's priceless. So I do agree that it's changing, and I think it's for the better. I'm curious. You seem to have had this um, this characteristic about yourself where you've always maybe advocated for your needs, at least in terms of like your mental health? I mean, high school and basically going to your parents and saying, "Hey, look, I need to speak to somebody about this because it's not congruent with how I believe I should be living my life." Where did that come from?
I am a sensitive soul, Ray. I've
Okay.
always been a very sensitive kid, and I think sensitive translates to dramatic is what other people would call me all my life, is like, you're
Mm,
dramatic, you're so dramatic.
yeah.
But I really feel things very deeply. I feel emotions very deeply. I've suffered from depression and anxiety my entire life. In college, my friends would have to come get me out of bed because I was spending days in bed just like feeling down. At the
Mhm.
time, I didn't know that that was depression. I just thought that that was normal, right?
Yeah.
But then as I learned more, it was like, no, I was actually having these depressive episodes that I still have to this day, but my drinking wasn't helping that at
Yeah.
all. It was only making things worse. And so I think that just growing up that way and always just feeling things so deeply and knowing, I always knew when my emotions would get too much to bear almost. And like, so that example that I talk about in high school was one of those moments where it was like, if I don't say this out loud, I'm worried about what I might do or what might happen to me. And so
Mhm.
it was just a moment where I was just like, I have to at least try or at least do this one thing because I feel like I cannot keep it inside anymore. And so I don't know, I've always been like that.
I mean, that's a fantastic, fantastic part of your personality to have. I'm sure, and then ultimately, it gets you to this place where you're starting to unpack, something that you found is detrimental to yourself, right? So your relationship with alcohol. Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the episode. If you are, we'd really love it if you could leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcast or a rating on Spotify. And of course, please feel free to invite somebody into the conversation. If you feel like you have a story to share on the podcast, why not apply to be a guest? You can do so by completing the form on the podcast description or find it on stackanddays.com. That's stacknday's.com. But for now, let's jump back into the conversation. Let's step back into that and onto the timeline. You're now attending these virtual meetings. I personally, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't go that route, so I don't know what community looks like virtually when you're in meetings necessarily versus being in the room. I did at one point in my career with alcohol step into an AA room once, and I had at the time, it's a short story, I had been triggered by something, and I ended up drinking like a fifth of whiskey, and
Mhm.
needless to say, like the next morning was not was not in a good spot. And my wife now, at the time, she wasn't very happy, and I said, you know what, let me go to a meeting, see, try to act as though that I'm, trying to get a handle on this thing. So I went into the meeting, never walked back into the meeting after that, just because I just didn't feel like I fit in. So I don't know what the virtual experience looked like, but I would assume, just having also, come off of alcohol in the midst of the pandemic, it was a pretty isolating time. I think, just generally speaking, for people, and then for Black folks, we talk about it on Stack of Days all the time. There was a lot going on for our community in 2020,
Mhm.
heading into
Mhm.
2021. So what did that transition, that experience look like for you as you were trying to grapple with these big questions and realities in your own life, and trying to find the support system in your life to be able to like live the way that you wanted to live?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to give a disclaimer because I don't want anyone listening to this to not try AA based on what I'm about to say. I think everyone's experience is very different, but I think you hit the nail on the head when you said you didn't necessarily fit in. I think that it was something that was pretty similar for me as well.
Mm,
So I probably attended virtual meetings for maybe my first, I don't even think I made it 30 days of attending AA. I think it was maybe like 2 weeks, maybe three weeks for that first like 3 weeks. And I did it more as a daily accountability type of situation. If
yep.
anyone's familiar with AA, they're very into the 12 steps and all that stuff. And what I found when I was thinking about the 12 steps is that there was one step, but I can't remember right now, that I was really getting hung up on. It could have been maybe like making amends or something like that. And I didn't have anyone necessarily that I could go say, like, I'm sorry to, or like,
Hmm.
I did this thing to you that really hurt you. Like, I'm really sorry, because that just wasn't part of my alcohol story. I mean, I could say I'm sorry to my 6-month-old son that I was hungover, but like he wouldn't, understand that. And like typically when I would get drunk, if anything, I just blacked out and like people were annoyed with me because I didn't make it out that night or something. But it was never to that point of like having to really like make amends. So I think I got kind of hung up on that, where I was just like, that's not necessarily driving with where I'm going. But at the same time, a part of AA is like having a sponsor. And I just remember I had the sponsor, and my husband had like set up a hotel room for me for the weekend to just like get away. Like I was stressed. He knows that I recharge by being alone. I like to just like lay in bed, watch my shows. So he's like, go, have a weekend. Like I got the baby, you'll be good. And I remember talking to my sponsor that night, and I was just like, I'm at this hotel by myself and I'm like really craving a drink. Like I'm really thinking about just like going to the hotel bar and having a drink tonight. And I remember her saying, she was like, why would your husband send you alone? And I was just like, that's not, that's some misdirected anger. Like
Mm.
he's fine. Like he actually did something great for me. I'm
Trying to
talking
look
to
out for
you
you. Yeah.
about, yeah, I'm talking to you about a craving that I had, and I'm expecting you to talk to me about my craving, not like, something that you feel my husband did wrong. And that was
Mm.
where I just kind of felt like I'm not really understood in this space. I think there was just some differences there. And I was grateful for, hearing the stories, having that community, really understanding the concept of taking it one day at a time. I think that's so real when people say 1 second, 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day. Like it really is a constant decision when
Yeah.
you're talking about sobriety. And so I'm grateful for learning that and for having that foundation. But then when it came, you asked about my community, that's when I was like, that's how I ended up starting my page, Soulfully Sober, because I'm
Mm.
like, where are the Black sober people at? And so, like,
Yeah.
I just wanted to create something where I was like, I don't see other people like me and my friends talking about their sobriety. And like, when I started looking for sober accounts and sober groups on like Instagram, it's a lot of white women. And so I wanted to start my page with the hopes that people would gravitate and I would find them so that I could feel like I was seeing other people. And what ended up happening is my friends in my community who started seeing my page were like, wow, you're so inspiring. Like, I'm thinking twice about how I'm drinking now, or like, I'm not drinking anymore, or I'm drinking less now. And thank you for sharing. And I'm like, that's great. I wasn't planning for that to happen, but I'm happy that that's happening. And I'm happy that people are thinking about it and talking about it.
Yeah. I appreciate your disclaimer, and and obviously I resonate with your experience with AA. But again, I think for folks who are out there listening, give it a shot. You know what I mean? I feel like the alternative. We know what the alternative looks like, right? And I think that the beauty is that there are so many different resources that we could take advantage of today, and it's not just AA. But if that's the
Hmm.
only one that you can get your hands on, give it a shot.
Hmm.
Um, I will also say that I too, when you look at the space, especially on social, I mean, it's a lot of white women, and which is fine, but then the question becomes, well, in this space do I fit in, right?
Hmm.
And I think that that's also partially why I created Stack and Days, because this alcohol, this substance, and the reasons why people use it to excess and abuse it has nothing to do with the color of your skin. Yet when you look at the other side of alcohol, it seems to be pretty homogenous. So shout out to all the people, regardless of your ethnic, racial makeup, and if you've been able to take this thing on and have had some success, fantastic. But I do think that there needs to be more spaces that focus on our stories and our experience. So thank you for for leaning into it for those reasons.
Sure thing.
So then, tell me then, you're 2-3 weeks into AA. You say fantastic. This is great for some, maybe not necessarily for me. I'm going to continue on this journey, but I know that it needs to look different. What did you start doing at that point to continue to walk your path?
So I had the benefit of having quit alcohol for a year before I started the sobriety journey that I'm on now. So I actually
Okay.
quit in 2018 for 1 year. It was just like a New Year's resolution. I was just like, I'm going to stop drinking. At that time, I didn't even know how long I was going to stop drinking, but I was just like, I'm going to take a break. And it ended up being a year. And when I reached the year, I was like, wow, I stopped drinking for a year. I'm cured. I can
Yeah.
go back to drinking. If I can not drink for a year, then I could do anything. And I ended up falling back into those same habits, especially with the pandemic. It was like, what else are we going to do but drink?
Yeah.
And so when I quit drinking in 2022, I had already had the benefit of what it felt like to not drink for a year. So I had already understood how much better my sleep was going to become, how much clearer my skin was going to get, how my body and my physical fitness and all of those things were going to improve. And so having that experience, it was like, why would I ever go back? Like I could say with confidence that I've quit and went back and it was the same thing and it wasn't good for me. So this time I can say that I'm never going to drink again. And so if it wasn't for, I call it kind of like my relapse period, if I didn't have that experience and that confidence, it'd probably be a little bit different and a little bit harder. But because I have experienced it before, I'm like, I'm not going back.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, I think a lot of folks think about that. Like if I become sober and, how many other days and months and years you're able to string together. If I relapse, then, I got to throw everything out. But to your point, that was a learning opportunity for you and also a feeling opportunity. You were able to feel what it was like to live your life without this substance. And I think that that's a valuable piece of the journey, right? I mean,
Yes.
how long between your first bout with sobriety and ultimately, where you are today? How much time went between? How much time are you drinking between those two points?
Yeah, it was about 2.5 years.
Okay, so you went back and
Hmm.
and drank for another 2.5 years before.
Hmm.
Wow. I'm trying to think. I mean, I've probably was able to get to like a couple weeks, maybe 30 days, never got a year under my belt before pursuing. So, hats off to you. And I think that that's valuable. You because a year is a good mark to really get it out of your system. Um, what would you say is the major difference between that first bout, that first year, and ultimately where you are today? Well, how have you kind of attacked it, pursued it differently this time around, other than the fact that you had that knowledge going into this period of sobriety?
Yeah, I think I'm more clear on who I am. So I think people should know that everyone's relationship with substances is different. There
Yep.
are there are people who can just have one glass of wine and they're like, I'm good. Like, I don't need another glass. My next drink might not be for another week. But I had to accept for me that I'm not a moderate drinker. I cannot moderate. And so when I first quit drinking, that wasn't necessarily something that I was thinking about. I just
Yep.
thought I was just like taking a break. The second time, it was like, you're stopping, you're removing this from your life because you do not mix with it. It does not mix with you. You cannot moderate. It doesn't bring any positivity. So I had to understand, like, for myself, again, you mentioned like the reasons of why I'm drinking. I'm drinking because I think that it's fun. Is it fun? I think I can find some other things to have fun by doing different stuff. I'm drinking because my friends drink. Are they really my friends? Because if I don't drink, they should still be my friends, right? So if I have to lose relationships because I'm not drinking anymore, I had to be comfortable with that. And so there were a lot of questions that I asked myself this second time with sobriety that I had to be comfortable answering and understanding about myself to be comfortable with not drinking anymore. And so it was really about being honest with myself in those answers and
Mhm.
being honest about what I might potentially lose and if it was worth it. And the answer is yes, it's
Mm.
worth it. It's worth never having a hangover again. It's worth never blacking out and not remembering again. Like, I love now when I go out with my friends, I'm telling you every single thing that happened, every single thing that was said. I was there, I was present. I love that. And so I was just gaining so much, and I couldn't think of a reason why I would want to keep alcohol in my life.
Mm. When you were kind of you're going about this self audit on your relationship, were there any questions that you asked yourself that were kind of really uncomfortable to ask yourself and uncomfortable to come to the answers on?
I think I was probably most uncomfortable with, okay, you stopped drinking. Now you don't have any excuse to ignore those ideas or dreams that you
Hmm.
have. And I think I was uncomfortable with not having that as an excuse or kind of having that to like my alcohol to fall back on why I'm not getting as far as I want to. And then really having to look at myself and my habits that might be keeping me from achieving the things that I know in my heart that I can achieve. That one was really hard. But
Yeah.
what I will say is that removing alcohol gives me so much mental clarity. The one day at a time gives me so much mental clarity to understand that building any dream, it starts with small steps and small things, right? Like people want to go from 0 to 100 in 2 seconds. And not drinking has allowed me to see that, like, it's just building over time, it's accumulating over time. As long as you're moving forward and making progress, you'll get there. And so that has been really helpful. And I think also me removing alcohol, I really wanted to think about the wife and mother that I wanted to be. And so it was a bit of an uncomfortable thing to think about of like, I don't know, I was really fun and passionate when I was drunk. Like, will my husband still love me the same? Will our lives still be the same? Will it still be fun? That was scary to think about and uncomfortable to think about, but I'm happy to say that things are actually so much better now and than I could have imagined. So,
That's awesome.
yeah,
How old is your son now?
he is 3 and some change. He'll be 4 in January.
Oh, that's a fun age. I got a 4 year old myself, so I totally get that. Um, your husband, your relationship with your partner and friend, um, how did that evolve for you? I mean, it sounds as though he's been a part of this journey as well, right? So I am curious how that's played out, and what that kind of bell curve looks like.
Totally. I mean, me and my husband met when we were 19 years old. So he was there in the college days. He
Mm,
knows how I was with my drinking and my habits, and he's seen every version of me. I think what's really beautiful is I never gave him an ultimatum. I never said that, you need to stop drinking or anything like that. And he's been supportive of me not drinking from day one, but he actually stopped drinking 6 months after I did.
that's
And
awesome.
so he's been on his, it'll be 2 years for him in December. And I think that having someone, you don't really know what that unconditional love is until like you really make a major change and
Yeah.
that person still sticks beside you and still loves you and wants you anyway. And I think that it was so beautiful for him to say, "You're still so fun," or you're like, "You're still that fun person you are, even if you're not drinking." That meant so much to me and gave me the confidence of like, all right, if I lose friends, like, I don't care because my husband says I'm still fun, like, I'm still good. And that was amazing. And I think it makes us both better parents, more patient for
Hmm.
sure, more active. We love being the family that's out at 8 a.m. on a Saturday. We're like, everyone's hungover. Like, we got the place to ourselves. They won't be out till noon. Like, we live for that. And so I think it's been nothing but good.
When he was stepping into his own alcohol-free life, was it more so in solidarity with you, or did he say, this is probably it's probably better for me anyways. And now that I can see this shining example in my wife, I just think culturally for our family it makes sense. What was kind of the process for him? I mean, I don't want you necessarily have to speak on his behalf, but I am curious how
Yeah.
it came to pass.
Yeah, I think it was exactly that. I think he saw how positive it was for me, how good I was feeling, and how much it was just changing my attitude and even like my physical health overall, where he felt like, yeah, maybe this is better for me. But I also think the last time he drank, we were like at this wedding, we were in Mexico. I'm 6 months sober at that point. He's like drinking, having so much fun, and I'm just like, "You're really annoying me, like,
Mm.
go be drunk somewhere else," you know? And I think that for him, he's like he was like, "Oh, I don't know. I don't know if it's worth all that."
Yeah.
So, I think he understood that not only was I benefiting so positively from it, but it would be really good for him too.
Well, good for him. Good for you all. I appreciate you sharing that. Uh, so, what do you think is kind of like the misconceptions that a lot of folks have in stepping into sobriety? I mean, I know for you, you found that you're just as fun. You're probably more motivated now than ever. But I do think that there are some buckets out there that people worry about. I don't, now kind of looking at it in hindsight, it's almost like a no-brainer for me personally. But what do you think are some of these like misconceptions that folks have about sobriety that they probably shouldn't?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest misconception is people think that you have to either hit a really crazy rock bottom to
Mm,
like stop drinking alcohol, like right? Like they think that you have to have like ruined your life completely and like lost everything you had in order to enter into sobriety. And I don't think that has to be the case at all. You can live a beautiful life, um, and still decide to enter sobriety. And I think that's completely fine. So I would say that's one of the things. Like if you tell someone they don't drink, you don't drink, they automatically assume that you have this crazy story or had like this really bad problem. And it's like, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Um, and I think the other thing is that people think sobriety is boring. And I think we've just been programmed by really amazing marketing to think that alcohol is fun. And
yeah.
so I think that there is so much more of the world to see and experience through a sober lens that I wish a lot of people had the opportunity to see and feel.
Yeah. I agree with you on both of those points. And again, you almost have to like expose yourself to the other side, if you want to call it that, to understand it, right? Like, to your point, you don't have to hit a rock bottom. And also everyone's, bottom looks different. I
Yes.
everyone's bottom looks different. I've talked to some folks on this podcast where you hear the stories and you're just like, wow, I can't even believe that you're still here. And
Hmm.
then you talk to other folks who made a decision to stop because they just had a gut feeling that their lives would be better. And so there's a huge spectrum I feel like folks can make that call on, but I think everyone can benefit from taking a peek at what the other side can look like, and you make a qualified decision for yourself at that point. But I think for folks of color, where we have so much stuff stacked against us, it's only it's such a powerful tool in being able to like step into that light, which for argument's sake, for folks out there, I think we're all destined for it. But with that being said, what are some of the things that you are now getting your hands on that were, unthinkable for you, back when you were probably struggling in the height of your struggles?
Yeah, I think one of the things, I know everything happens in the timing that it's supposed to, but I'm actually sad that I drank so much during my college years because I
Mm,
feel like that is the perfect time for sobriety. I know
I
college kids
know.
are probably like, girl, what? But I feel like it's a beautiful time for sobriety when you're exploring what you're passionate about and what you
Yeah.
want to do. I mean, even in college, I was still hustling, right? Like I had my internships. I was working at a news station. I was interning at the radio station. I was like doing all of those things. And I knew that I had this love and passion for media and content creation and all of that stuff. But at the same time, I was just drinking so much. And that was my having fun and all of those things were my priority, where it was like, I wasn't necessarily taking those things as far as I could have at that age and had so much of a head start, back then. But I've always had this passion for just like I love watching TV shows. I love a good movie, especially when it comes to action. And I'm finally pursuing a career in film. And so I've been getting my certificate in screenwriting. I'm going to be going to film school at the beginning of the year. I'm going to film festivals and just getting more into the scene. And I'm thankful for some my sobriety that gives me the clarity to see that
Right.
that is what I've always been passionate about. I've always wanted to do this. I can see the things that I would gravitate towards from college, from honestly elementary school when I had like the internal news network that I was on, as a
Mm,
host. So like that seed was always there, but I wasn't watering it. I wasn't focused enough. I didn't have that clarity to really pour into that. And so now that I know that that's what I want to do, I'm building that foundation and I'm starting to just, line things up and pour any time that I have into those things. And it makes me feel really excited.
hmm. I love that. I think that that's so spot on too. Is that in those periods of one's life where the expectation is that you're going to be exploring yourself, not having alcohol a part of that equation only kind of enriches the likelihood that you're going to get the most out of that period. I get it. I mean, and you're so right on that, because you don't even know it in the moment how the doors and like the stained glass windows that are in front of your vision when you're trying to identify who you are as a person. And and so what happens is that later in life you get to a point where now you want to start evaluating who you are and evolving into to who you are. It's kind of but I'm there too. I mean, I that's what even in starting this podcast, I tell people all the time, like, I'm not a podcast person. I never studied media, but
Mhm.
you step into these spaces that enrich you because you've given yourself an opportunity to, and you've given yourself an opportunity to stick with it long enough where you can start to see, wow, this is actually part of who I am, and I
Yeah,
love that. So thanks for calling that out. I think it's really important, for folks to understand that you're giving yourself a shot, you're giving yourself an opportunity.
exactly.
Yeah. I got a couple questions as we kind of get to the close here. One, um, is kind of is revolved around your son. Being that he was such a focal point and motivation behind you living the life that you're living today. If your son, sorry, and what's your son's name?
Mandela.
Mandela.
Hmm.
Okay, so if Mandela is listening to this conversation in 15, 20 years from now, what would you want to tell him? What would you want to memorialize in this conversation so that he can look back and hear his mother's voice expressed to him, based off of the decisions that you've made that in large part have been made because of him?
Wow. I hope I don't start crying. I'm also a crier now in sobriety. Like
It's
things
okay.
just get, I just start crying. Um, you know, I want him to feel like he can always do what he wants to do and be his authentic self. I think one of the things that I struggled with and probably why I drank for so long was because I felt like everyone else was doing it, and if I didn't do it, I would suffer in some way.
Hmm,
And I want him to always go against the grain, always question, why am I doing this? Who is it that's saying that this is what I should be doing? And is there a way that I can be doing things differently that would make me happy with
hmm.
myself, make me be able to look myself in the mirror and say that I'm doing things the way that I want to do it and I'm being the best version of myself. He's not going to be perfect, and that's okay, but being the best version of yourself is what's most important. And so I would want him to just always remember that.
I love that. If Mandela does listen to this in 18 to 20 years, he's should be super proud of his mother, and listen to those words and feel those words. I think they're really important. So thank you for sharing that. Um, couple other questions that I'd love to close this out with. One is, in those days where you obviously identified that you were living incongruent with how you wanted to live, where you were really struggling, how would someone outside of you have known that you were struggling if you didn't tell them explicitly?
Mm, I would say that's an amazing question because I feel like so many people suffer in silence. And
Hmm.
I think also, unless you've experienced and felt it, you don't understand. So, one thing I've told one of my best friends before is that I understand when, you see someone like a celebrity or even like a normal person, you see that they commit suicide and you say like, wow, they look like they had such a good life, or like they were just smiling and laughing, or just, doing this. I'm like, I feel that to my core because I live a beautiful life. I have a very happy life, but there are moments where I feel a deep sadness sometimes that, like, despite what the outside world sees, I feel this sadness of like, I don't know how I can go on or if I can go on anymore. And so I'm saying that to say that it's hard to always know when your friends are dealing and struggling with that. And if you have a friend that is struggling and like, don't beat yourself up for not necessarily knowing that they were going through that, because it's hard to explain to people, and it's hard for people who don't feel that same way to understand when someone says that they feel that way, because when they're looking at you and they're like, I don't get it, like, get over it, right? Cheer up.
Hmm. Hmm.
But it's so much more deeper than that. And so I don't really have an answer for that question of like, what are the signs to know? Um, but I think that if you just have a moment with someone to really look them in their eyes and just make it known that you care about them, that you're a safe space for them if they ever need you, that you are there for them. Like, I know that I have a friend that I can call when I am feeling that deepness and just say, like, I am feeling this right now. Like, it feels so heavy. I can just cry on the phone with her. She'll hear me, she'll listen to me, she'll pray for me. And then she's like, all right, like, I've done what I can. I know she's done what she can, and I just have to like ride the wave. And so I mean, just show up for the people that you love in the best way that you know how. Sometimes the signs aren't always clear, aren't always there, but there can be some obvious ones, like spending a lot of times in bed, or like if you have that friend that like falls off the face of the earth sometimes, like maybe just check in, like, hey, I haven't seen you post in a while, or like I haven't heard from you. Like, are you good? If you see someone who is drinking heavily, like, are you running from something? Are you trying to cope with something? Sometimes asking those hard questions versus brushing it under the rug, but we're all just doing our best in this world.
Yeah, you got that right. And just so you know, there's no like, in my opinion, there's no right or wrong answer. But I asked that question because I do find, particularly in our community, we also whether we're the ones who are suffering or we're trying to support the folks who are suffering. Oftentimes, we sit there and we say to ourselves after the fact when it's too late that I could have done more. So I think it's one, maybe there are some signs that you can look out for, and then two, we can't we got to give ourselves grace when it comes to embracing our neighbors, embracing our friends, embracing our community. And I think that in trying and attempting to create those safe spaces where we can talk to each other, we have to be okay with not necessarily knowing the answers or the questions sometimes.
Yes.
So I appreciate that response. um, Last question I have. So if there's an individual out there listening to this and they're questioning their relationship with alcohol, and but they don't necessarily know what their first step could be in trying to rectify that relationship with alcohol, what would you suggest to that person?
Mm. I first want to say 30 days alcohol free is a scam. You need like 90 to really feel the glow of quitting alcohol. So I'll just
Mhm.
say, like, if anyone is thinking about stopping or like trying, like, 90 days just to test the waters, I would highly recommend. But as far as like a first step, it's really we talked a little bit ago about just answering those honest questions about yourself. So it's like,
Yeah.
some people can, like, I can be around alcohol and like not feel triggered. Some people can't. So it's like, do you need to remove everything from your home? Do you need to tell someone that you're going on this journey so that you have someone holding you accountable and checking in? But at the end of the day, it really comes down to you and
Hmm.
your actions. And like I said, taking it 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day at a time is so important. And so those moments where you think, I have a drink, you might even go as far as to order the drink or have the drink in front of you. But asking that question of, do I really want to do this right now? Why am I doing it right now? What benefit is it that I think that this is going to bring? Asking those questions before you have that drink can sometimes help you to realize that like you don't really need it. And maybe you can pour it out, or like maybe you just need to go get something to eat. I really turned to desserts when I first started quitting. I gave myself all the cakes, donuts, candies, everything. I was like, I'm not drinking anymore, so I'm gonna have every sweet that I want, and I'm not gonna feel bad about it. So I would just say, start small and try to set yourself up for success. So if you don't need to go out with those friends because you know that they're going to be drinking and you're going to feel tempted to drink, don't go out with them. And just really try to protect yourself in that way to give yourself a real shot.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Creating those boundaries for yourself, being honest with yourself. I think honesty really it's an easy word to say, but it's a hard word to kind of live and enact. And it starts with yourself. And I think a lot of what you just mentioned is just really about having those honest dialogue with yourself. Nobody else is listening. Nobody, it's just but you gotta have that dialogue with yourself.
Yeah.
Which I think is super important. Jasmine, where can folks find you so that we can continue to follow your journey?
Sure. Follow me on Instagram at Soulfully Sober. I am a little quiet on the socials right now, but I'll be back in 2025. So check me out there. And I'm always checking my DMs. I love when people reach out to me and just tell me about their early sobriety journey or just want to chat. I am here to talk. So you can follow me there.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I really appreciated having an opportunity to sit down and talk with you a little bit, and I'll continue to follow your journey. And I hope that one day I'm able to sit here and open up my Netflix app and watch an action flick that has been that has been brought into this world by way of your creative energy. So thank you so much once again. Really do appreciate it, and let's stay in contact. Okay.
This is great. Thanks, Ray.
Awesome. Everybody, we'll be back next week with another interview. And until then, be well, one day at a time. Peace. I appreciate you guys listening to the Stacking Days podcast. I hope this episode added value to your recovery and wellness journey. Before we go our separate ways, let's connect on social. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Stacking Days or via the website www.stackingdays.com. By supporting the show, you can play a direct role in amplifying people of color in their pursuit of recovery. The easiest way to do that is to subscribe or hit the follow button. This way, you'll never miss an episode, all while playing an active part in creating the ecosystem where diverse voices and healing matter. This show is for the purpose of education and connection and is not a replacement for therapy or recovery care. For more information on the resources and support available, take a look at SAMHSA and some other resources shared in the description. Until we meet again, be well, one day at a time.